The theft was impossible. A priceless artifact, the architect's eye diamond, had vanished as if vaporized from a vault, protected by lasers, pressure plates, seismic sensors, and a dozen digital alarms. The FBI had no clues. They blamed the old night guard, Silas Kane, whom they had always seen dozing in his chair. They were about to fire him when the old man cleared his throat and told them to stop looking at the cameras and start looking at the walls. "The thief didn't use your technology," he said. "He used the building's ghost." The marble floors of the Metropolitan Museum of History were covered with the countless footprints of crime scene investigators and FBI agents. Young, ambitious, and a worshiper of technology, Special Agent Ava Rostova was barking orders at her team. Check all server logs 3 times. Reanalyze the thermal camera recordings. They must have created a ghost loop. This is a digital job. Rostova didn't believe in physical evidence. For her, every crime left a data trail. But this time, the data ocean was bone dry. The 4K cameras had recorded an empty pedestal. The sensors had remained silent. The locks hadn't been forced. In a small office to the side, Silas was being interrogated. This man in his 70s looked even smaller in his old, slightly oversized uniform. He sat calmly, answering every question with a tired but clear "yes, ma'am" or "no, ma'am." Agent Rostova gave instructions to the young agent interrogating him via radio. "Press him. I'm sure he slept all night. He either heard something or he's in on this." But Silas, despite all the pressure, didn't change his story. "It was a quiet night, as always," was all he would say. The museum director was pacing back and forth in a panic, complaining that the insurance wouldn't pay out due to this negligence. "This man must be fired immediately," he shouted. "We pay him to protect a multi-million-dollar artifact, and he's napping." After several hours of intense digital analysis, Agent Rostova and her team came up with a theory. This was an incredibly sophisticated inside job. A hacker had created a ghost loop in the security cameras, meaning the cameras were showing an old recording while the thief slipped in. The entire investigation focused on current and former museum employees with high-level digital access. And Silas was noted down in the file as negligent personnel and temporarily suspended. As 2 security officers escorted Silas out of the building, they passed through the grand main hall. Silas paused for a moment. He lifted his head and looked at the 100-year-old ornate brass ventilation grate high up on the ceiling. In that grate, which everyone else saw as an architectural detail, Silas saw something else, a tiny, fresh scratch on the brass. His eyes, like a trained cartographer scanning a landscape, followed an almost invisible path from that scratch. From the scratch to the complex plaster ornaments on the ceiling. From there to the chain of the giant chandelier in the very center of the hall. And finally to the spot where the now empty pedestal stood. He approached Agent Rostova. He cleared his throat. "Agent," he said, his voice a whisper, "you're looking in the wrong place." Rostova turned to him, annoyed. "What did you say, old man?" "You're looking at the cameras, the computers," Silas said. "You should be looking at the walls. The thief didn't use your technology. He used the building's ghost." Rostova let out a contemptuous laugh. "The building's ghost? Stop telling us fairy tales and go home. If you're lucky, you'll only get fired for this." She signaled to the security guards, and Silas was escorted out, his last words hanging in the air. Agent Rostova's digital investigation hit a complete wall. All employees had ironclad alibis. There wasn't the slightest trace of a hack in the system. The press started running stories about the FBI's incompetence. Rostova was facing the biggest fiasco of her career. Meanwhile, Silas was spending his suspension at the public library. But he wasn't reading mystery novels. He was closed off in the microfiche archive, studying newspaper articles and plans from the museum's original construction in the early 1900s. The narrator continues as Silas's past comes to life. 30 years ago, he wasn't a guard. He was Silas Kane, the museum's head of facilities and historical preservation. He was a man who loved the museum like his own home, who knew its every stone, its every secret. He remembered in the 1980s, when the museum's board of directors decided to equip the building with a modern, digital security system. That day, he had stood alone against this decision in the meeting room. "This building is a living organism," he had argued. "You can't just put a new skin on it while ignoring its 100-year-old veins, its service routes, its pulley systems. The real weak point will be this old infrastructure that you've forgotten." But they hadn't listened to him. He was labeled old-fashioned. Still, he had done what he knew was right. He had secretly used part of the restoration budget to restore the building's original service routes, the old coal-powered pulley system used to lower the chandeliers for maintenance, and the dumbwaiters. His goal wasn't to use them, but to preserve the building's history, its soul. He knew every secret passage of the building because he had repaired them with his own hands. When his warnings were ignored and the new, shiny security system was installed, he had quietly retired. But he couldn't stay away from the building. A few years later, at a time when no one would associate him with his former position, he had returned as a night guard, just to listen to the silence of the building he loved. In the dim light of the library, Silas found what he was looking for. In the original plans, there was a network of service tunnels, sealed off in the 1920s but never completely filled, leading to a forgotten coal chute right under what was now the art gallery. And that ventilation grate didn't lead directly to these tunnels, but to the attic space where the main pulley system for the chandeliers was located. The plan was now clear in his mind. The thief had entered through the coal chute, reached the building's basement using the old service tunnels, and from there, used the pulley system to bypass all the sensors on the floor and reach the diamond from the ceiling. This was a crime committed not with technology, but with history. At the FBI headquarters, a young agent on Rostova's team, Maria, was frustrated with the lack of progress. For a moment, the old guard's last words came to her mind. The building's ghost. It seemed like nonsense, but what if it wasn't? On a whim, she searched the archives for the name Silas Kane. Not just as a guard, but as a former employee. And she was shocked by what she found. Silas's former position, his old reports, and most importantly, the report he had written in the 1980s, warning against the exact type of theft that had just happened. Breathlessly, she put the file on Agent Rostova's desk. When Rostova read the file, the color drained from her face. First came disbelief, then amazement, and finally shame. That old, senile guard had been telling them the answer from the very beginning. That evening, Rostova knocked on the door of Silas's modest apartment. Silas wasn't surprised when he opened the door. "I was expecting you, Agent," he said. Rostova showed him the file. "You knew," was all she said. Silas invited her in. On his kitchen table he had spread out copies of the old plans from the library. "I didn't know," Silas said. "The building knew. I just listened to it." And then he explained the thief's likely route, the technique he used, and the only kind of evidence he might have left behind: coal soot. "Your thief is not a hacker," Silas said. "He is an acrobat, a historian, and a ghost. Look for someone who has obsessively studied the museum's original architecture, probably a wealthy collector." With this new information, Agent Rostova decided to deepen the investigation. Silas's warning echoed in her mind. Look for the ghost in the museum's files, not in your own. The next day, she and her team dived into the museum's dusty archive room. This was a place where time had stood still, filled with leather-bound ledgers, yellowed plans, and handwritten letters. After hours of research, they found the name of the building's original architect, Theodore Croft. He was a brilliant man, but his name had been overshadowed by the museum's founding families. He had been almost completely erased from public records. However, when they found Croft's personal, unpublished journals, the story deepened. The journals were filled with brilliant designs, but also bitter notes about how he had been cheated by the museum's wealthy founders, how his designs had been stolen. And most importantly, they found a final, cryptic entry. "They have taken my name, but they cannot take my soul. My legacy is sealed within the walls themselves, a final puzzle for those with eyes to see. The architect's eye is the key." In that moment, Rostova understood. The diamond wasn't called the serpent's eye. It was the key to the architect's legacy. She figured the thief must be a descendant of Croft. They followed the family lineage and found a famous architectural historian named Julian Croft, just as Silas had described. When they raided his mansion, they didn't find him with the diamond. They found him in a study, surrounded by his great-grandfather's original plans. The architect's eye diamond was not on display. It was placed in a scale model of the museum. When the diamond was put in its place, it acted as a lens for a light source, projecting a hidden message from the model onto the wall. A message from Theodore Croft, detailing the fraud committed against him. Julian hadn't stolen the diamond to sell it. He had stolen it to solve the puzzle left by his great-grandfather and to reveal the truth. As Julian Croft explained his motive to Agent Rostova, this was no longer a simple theft case. This was a complex story of historical injustice. But during the interrogation, Julian anxiously added, "You had to find it before he did. He's also looking for this secret, but his goal is not to reveal it, but to bury it forever." "Who are you talking about?" Rostova asked. Julian replied, "Vale. Damien Vale, the grandson of my great-grandfather's greatest rival." This new name took the investigation to a whole new dimension. Rostova and her team began to investigate the Vale family. The Vales appeared to be a respectable private security and acquisitions firm, but behind the scenes, they were a dark family involved in historical artifact smuggling and corporate sabotage. Their leader, the ruthless Damien Vale, had inherited his great-grandfather's hatred for Theodore Croft like a legacy. Vale's goal was to completely erase Croft's name from history, and he knew that the master ledger containing all of Croft's secrets was hidden somewhere in the museum. The architect's eye was the final key to that ledger's location. Julian Croft had stolen the diamond to prevent Vale from getting his hands on it. This wasn't a theft, it was a rescue operation. When Silas heard the name Vale, his face went white. "Damien Vale," he whispered. "He's not just a businessman, he's a predator. If he wants that ledger, he'll come back to the museum, and this time, he won't be using the secret passages." 3 days later, a massive power outage hit the city. It wasn't a coincidence. It was Vale's operation. In the midst of the chaos created by the outage, Vale and his men, dressed in black and equipped with military gear, infiltrated the museum. Their goal was to find Croft's secret study and take that ledger. But a surprise was waiting for them. Agent Rostova and her FBI team, guided by Silas, were waiting for them. Silas had shown them the perfect spots to set up an ambush in the museum's old, forgotten corridors. Inside the museum, in the shadow of historical artifacts, a modern battle was fought. While Vale's men relied on technology and firepower, Rostova's team used the building itself as a weapon. Guided by Silas, they used the old service elevators as traps, cornered them in narrow corridors, and finally trapped Vale in a soundproof, steel-doored secret room, a product of Theodore Croft's genius. The diamond was returned to its rightful place. The museum director apologized to Silas repeatedly and offered him his old job back. Silas politely refused, but agreed to act as a special consultant to help integrate the old knowledge with new technology. As for Julian Croft's case, in light of the historical facts that came to light, it ended with an unexpected result. He received a sentence for theft, but the court also officially recorded the historical crime committed against the Croft family. In the final scene, Agent Rostova visits Silas at the museum, but she doesn't find him in the director's luxurious office, but in the building's basement. Silas is showing her the entrance to the forgotten pulley system. The surroundings are dim. The air smells old and mechanical. "The building always tells a story, Agent," Silas says, touching an old lever on the wall. "You just have to know how to listen." Rostova looked at this old man with a newfound respect. This man hadn't just saved a diamond. He had saved an idea, the idea that even the most advanced security is worthless if you forget the history it's built upon. And sometimes the quietest guardians are the ones who know where the real ghosts live.